thank you all for coming out today. Appreciate you coming. I think this is your 13th roundtable. For those who aren't familiar with who and what NJ Spotlight is, we're a news service. We're independent, we're nonpartisan. We report on issues, policies, and legislation at the state capital and Trenton that have a high impact on local communities. So we host these roundtables as an opportunity to create a public forum where people can just come together and discuss what the key policy issues are of the day. I think we're going to have a good time with this one. We're supported by the Community Foundation of New Jersey, by the John and James Knight Foundation, by William Penn, by the Geraldine Dodge Foundation, by Robert Wood Johnson, and by the Healthcare Institute. Today, this event is being supported by the New Jersey Smart Growth Alliance, and they've asked me to read a statement which I'll read before we begin. This program is granted in part with a grant from the New Jersey State Growth Alliance. The Alliance is comprised of a variety of organizations and individuals who are collectively interested in encouraging the incorporation of smart growth principles to the planning and development process at the earliest possible stages. The Alliance was the brainchild of Richard Johnson from Matrix Development and was modeled on similar programs in other regions. The original idea was that the Alliance would give upfront recognition to the projects and programs that embody smart growth principles. Two such projects, the proposed redevelopment of the former AT&T facility on Bell and the proposed development in Radburn, New Jersey's first planned community, received recognition awards. However, the downturn in the economy, together with the market and government-driven trend towards more compact, urban-oriented redevelopment projects, eventually left the Alliance with little to do. The Alliance, left with the surplus grant funds, felt that those funds should best be used to further the public dialogue on the future of the state's effort to encourage smart growth and sustainable development, hence the funding of this program today. NJ Spotlight appreciates the Alliance's efforts in this regard and want to thank the members of the board and its executive committee, many of whom are here today, for their foresight and generosity. So I'll start and we'll kick it off. Let me just lay out a couple of ground rules. We use Little League ground rules here, which means no shouting from the bleachers. We have index cards distributed at all the tables. And if you have questions, I'll be walking around the room. Just hold it up like it was an auction. And I'll come by and get your questions and deliver them to Tom Johnson, our moderator. We also have evaluation forms. We use these a lot. We really rely on these. So if you would, at the end of the program, just fill out your evaluation form and leave it on the table. We'll collect them later. That would be very helpful. And now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Tom Johnson. Tom is a long-term reporter with the Star-Ledger. He's been a co-founder and is a co-founder of NJ Spotlight. He writes on energy and environment. And with Tom, there he is. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank the panelists for being here. Great, distinguished group of panelists who bring a lot of expertise and knowledge to this topic. So let's just get started. Let me first introduce Dan Kennedy out of the Office for Planning Advocacy. He's Deputy Director, and before that he served as managed Burlington County's Agricultural Retention and Redevelopment Program. And Dan's been in the forefront of helping the University Administration draft a new strategic investment plan. Dan?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome. It's humbling to be on a panel with such renowned experts here. I find myself able to be in the shadow of their experiences, that we're all living in a better state because of many of their professional and private efforts trying to manage this acoustics. So we're all familiar with the state plan. Many of you in the room have been here participants or stakeholders in a strategic plan development process that started in earnest, frankly, in 2001. The title of this series here today is about conflict over smart growth and how it's growing. We all know as professionals and residents of New Jersey that the discussion between the government's role over private property rights is a conversation that's older than our country. So it's a more modern, developed conversation that's going on in relation to embracing these smart growth principles, that there's not a heck of a lot of disagreement, the values of smart growth that we all tend to embrace, and then we talk about how do we actually implement them. So smart growth, like other catchphrases, has kind of become a little cliche at times. So we're trying to evolve the principles of smart growth into a framework for smart governance with the state of New Jersey through the State Planning Commission and the State Planning Act, trying to rethink the framework for state involvement in state planning, trying to put a framework in place for us to have better, more productive conversations between state agencies and between the state and local government. Maybe I could just stand up and talk a little bit. All right. So we're really interested in trying to take the principles of smart growth, which one of the things that we haven't changed in the state plan is really focusing on those smart growth principles, and then trying to turn it into a system that can actually, when we butt up against impediments in state government, or lack of investment priority for certain of these issues, whether it's at the local level, or at the state or county level. So when there's friction points at the local or at the state level, we have a framework where the locals feel that there's an organized effort at the state through a steering committee that was formed by an executive order that will be put in place to not approve the state plan, but to help the state agency implementation of the state plan. The panelists, I believe, are going to get into some of the details about how they see the priorities within that smart growth value structure. What I'm excited to say is that I think if this plan is adopted as proposed, the state of New Jersey will have a framework to work with local governments, to have conversations about the important issues that we face, and to do our best to drill down and focus our investments in our regulatory systems to ensure that we support sustainable development that is willingly accepted at the local level, and to increase and give our residents more choices about where they live and where they work. Because we know, looking forward, reviewing all the data and not being snarky, that the market's changing, and the question for New Jersey is, will New Jersey be able to capitalize on this next market, or will it not be able to capitalize on this next market? And this next market is trending towards the dream we've always had as planners or as advocates of certain issues of more development closer to our public transportation system, a closer connection between housing and jobs. So as that market seems to be working in that direction, how can the state of New Jersey, working effectively with its local governments and other partners, especially the private sector, work and try to understand what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and then try to evolve and make decisions moving forward within this framework so we can actually see the results of the smart growth conversation take place. That's more redevelopment and infill, more investment in our transit areas, and having a better quality of life for all of our residents, which includes having people gainfully employed and having places for them to recreate, to buy fresh local foods, and have fresh air and water to drink. So those are some of those things are not any different. Part of the conversation on this for the past 30 years. I think what's different about the state strategic planning, how we're trying to reduce this conflict, is trying to have a framework to actually get and drill down to getting these solutions actually implemented instead of just talked about and put on a shelf in a library. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Our next speaker will be John Weingart. John is at the Eagleton Institute of Politics, but many people here in the room know him from his previous positions at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and he also was chair of the New Jersey Highlands Council. John?
Thanks. Nice to be here. It's nice to see so many old people, in any sense of the word, old friends. I want to make a couple of points. In thinking about this event, I'm not sure there's anything I'll say that I wouldn't have said a long time ago. But New Jersey has a long relationship with regional planning, smart growth. It goes back almost 50 years. It's either a love-hate relationship or an ambivalent relationship or both. But from New Jersey, everyone likes to say we're a home rule state and municipal decision-making is important. And then any part of the state we care about, we decide it doesn't work there. One by one, from the Meadowlands to the DNR Canal to the Pinelands to the Highlands, along the shore to some extent. There's been a bipartisan conclusion every few years that local planning and decision-making isn't working, and there's a need for some kind of statewide law or regional commission or regional plan that has to be drawn up in some different way. And to some extent, I think each time we do it a little worse than we did it before. But when the Meadowlands Commission Act was passed, there was teeth to do land use preservation and to cause development and to have tax sharing among municipalities. And then with Pinelands, we dropped off the tax sharing, and with Highlands, we dropped off the mandate for any growth and development. I'm not sure why, but that's what's happened, I think. I remember when the State Planning Act was being debated, and Jerry Stockman was the state senator from Trenton, who was the lead sponsor, and he said at one point that he felt like he was traveling around the state, going to some groups and saying, this has to pass. If we care about the future of the state, we're becoming congested, we're losing our open space, our cities are decaying, this has to pass. And then he was going around to other groups saying, it's just advisory, don't worry about it. It's just a nice thing. And that schizophrenia or whatever it is with us today. That's number one. I have 4 quick points. Number 2, writing a regional plan is really difficult. If any of us are going to do it as an individual, it's really hard to do it. Even if you have the planning skills and the GIS and everything else to make dealing with multiple factors and imperfect information and changing situations, it's just hard to do, period. Then, when you get into thinking about how you implement it, it becomes 100 times harder. And how you deal with competing with laws that were passed in different periods of time, regulations, different agencies, different policies, different levels of government, how you put all that together to implementation, everyone here knows it's really hard. And I think among the things that are needed to make this work are administrative discretion, allowing some administrative discretion, having some flexibility in laws and regulations, because you just can't anticipate every situation for any size region ahead of time. People on all sides of this issue say what they want is predictability and clarity. In any rulemaking discussion, and land use, and any regional planning discussion, none of us mean it. We want predictability for the things we like, but builders want predictability, but if you say no, they want to be able to argue why this site is different and this situation is different. And environmental groups want predictability, but if you say, well, the plan says it can be built here, they want an avenue to say, yeah, right, fine, whatever. And so I think there's a need for administrative discretion and flexibility, and to some extent, obviously with some protection so that it's not abused, but I think that's necessary. And finally, I think that the most critical issue for land use planning, and I don't know what anyone in this room does about it, is who is appointed to the Supreme Courts of New Jersey and the United States over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you look at the court decisions over the last 30 or 40 years that have supported administrative rulemaking in New Jersey, that have had an interpretation of the takings provision, the Constitution that allowed us to come to take for granted, those things could change. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Thank you for being here. I look forward to what everyone else has to say.
Thank you, John. Interesting points. Next speaker will be I'm Swan. She's the former executive director of the Highlands Council and a person who has a lot of familiarity with local government, that means serving as mayor of Lebanon Township. Want to try your mic there?
Yeah, I can try. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right, I'm usually loud anyway. It's great to be here today, and it's the first time I've been introduced as a former executive director of the Highlands, so it's interesting hearing it. But this state planning and planning in general is a love of mine, so it's great to be here with my colleagues to talk about this. I'm glad to see that state planning is coming back on the forefront of everybody's mind and back as something that we hope will be in place for the state of New Jersey to get direction, particularly for where the state is going to invest our funds. What's important to me in this issue, and I think John hit on it, is first of all we have to deal with the fact that planning is here, it's here to stay, and it should be here. We cannot continue to grow without planning. We have to plan in order to be able to make sure that we are able to sustain the growth. Part of the problem, I think, in growing conflicts is the language we use. What does smart growth mean to me? What does it mean to you? We all have different opinions on what it is. I think if we bring it down to the barest essentials and say that one should not ever contemplate growth unless one can answer certain questions. One needs to know how you're going to support that growth. Do you have water for that growth? Do you have wastewater for that growth? Is that going to be infrastructure, public infrastructure, or are we going to be growing on septics and using wells? We need to know those questions before we discuss growth. We need to talk about infrastructure such as transportation. And having conversations about growth without having that information is, I think, part of why we are in the mess we're in. We talk about sprawl, we've had state planning, as John pointed out, a history of state planning for years. 1921 was the first regional port authority in New York, New Jersey, and then you go down through the various years, and we've been involved in state planning in one fashion or another since 1934. So how come we haven't solved it yet? And when John said it gets worse and worse, I know the difficulty for Dan, being on the forefront now, and I'll own up, I was on the forefront in the past, and had great ideas and worked with a phenomenal staff and a great state planning commission. Well, then how come it didn't work? And I will tell you that my opinion is the reason state planning doesn't work isn't because the plan is placed on your library shelf, it's because the administration fails to make it work. And what I'm hearing in the current state plan, some very good messages that I've heard in the past. In fact, as they read from back in 1987, the development standards for limited growth areas part of the state planning process at the time. And they wrote that the primary objectives of the plan are to reduce sprawl, to protect natural resources, to stimulate development in urban areas, and to channel growth into nodes within designated transportation corridors. Tiers are designated as growth areas, while the remaining tiers are designated as limited growth areas. Well, we just ended up in the same place. So we've been saying the same thing repeatedly. When are we going to make it work? From my perspective and the experience I've had as a mayor and then working in state government in the Office of Smart Growth with the State Planning Commission and most recently with the Highlands Council, I believe it all comes back to very common sense principles. The first thing we need to do is have the information. And the issues and conflicts, I think, grow over the lack of information, shared information, publicly available. Because no one can dispute where the sewer lines are to put them down. But we will have continuing conflict if we don't understand exactly what that information is and what decisions are going to be made based on that information. And I don't believe we should adopt a state plan until we have the answers to both of those. I also think it's incredibly important, the public process. The process was put in place for the state plan back in 1986. And we need to follow that process. It is a public process. Now, we've just gone through the 6 public hearings that are required of the state plan. I would look now to see the response document to those comments so that we share and understand what the issues were and what the resolve will be. And I think that as a municipal mayor, I would say to you that I want to know when I look at that state plan, what does it mean to my community? From the environmental perspective, I want to know where those resources are that are going to be protected. And I think we have to stop talking about land in terms of wetlands. We have to think about it as a working environment and understand the values the environment brings to us. We cannot talk about state planning until we understand that we have to protect our water resources. Because we talk about property right values. There are no property right values if you don't have water. And we're coming to that, and I think this summer might be a test because of the weather we've been having. I'm not going to get into climate change, but definitely to say to you that when droughts occur is when people wake up and say, you know, we've got a problem with our water resources. So I think that before we move forward on the state plan, we need to have answers to those questions. And the conflicts will keep occurring until those answers are in place. And when we have a clear indication of what the resources are, what we need to protect, and indeed where the infrastructure exists, then we can map forward the future. But we need not to be afraid of maps as well. Because if we talk about predictability, and if we talk, as John did, about flexibility, we also have to have a rationale for every decision taken and a public process. I can tell you personally how painful the public process is, and I support it every inch of the way. So those are my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Our next speaker is Peter Kasbach. He's Executive Director of New Jersey Future. He's been a long-time advocate for land use practices, small land use practices. Peter?
Thank you very much. Can people hear that okay? All right. I'm really glad that we're able to have this event here today and to talk about the state plan as well as smart growth in the state's capital, in a nice urban area, in a gorgeous building. So, how many people have been here before? Wow, that's great. All right. So this is smart growth in action. New Jersey Future has been focusing on smart growth in the state plan for 25 years. It was the last iteration of the State Planning Act, 1985. When a diverse group of corporations, environmentalists, politicians, policymakers, Democrats, Republicans came together and said, you know, the state really needs to figure this out. We're still sprawling, we're not using our infrastructure wisely, we've got to plan this state better. And it was a very broad cross-section of people who came to this conclusion. And they created New Jersey Future after the State Planning Act was passed, and said, we need to make this thing work. The act is great, it has all the right goals, it sets the right vision, but let's make it work. And for 25 years, we've had some ups and downs. There have been successes. I think probably the biggest success of the state plan has been that it's made people aware that we can plan growth more intelligently, and that there are better ways of growing, and there are worse ways of growing, that there are consequences of bad growth patterns. We haven't had quite as many successes on being able to steer public policy, spending, rules, our laws into making smart growth more effective. And when we talk about it, we're all here on the inside talking about smart growth and state planning. But at the end of the day, what we really need is we know that New Jersey is still growing. For every decade since 1790, New Jersey has grown, and it will continue to grow. We also know that New Jersey has limited borders. We haven't annexed anything from Pennsylvania or New York or Delaware, and so we're not growing physically. So you can probably do the math in your head that says if you keep on growing and you don't expand your borders, we're going to run out of space. And most of you are probably already familiar with the statistics that less than 20% of our land in New Jersey is still considered developable, meaning it doesn't have environmental constraints or isn't already built. We are the most developed state in the country by far. So we're running into these issues first, which is, we can all cheer for that, yay, we're first. But it also means that we've got to take this a lot more seriously than we have been, because we're not going to get leadership from other parts of the country because they're just not there yet. So it's up to New Jersey to really look at this issue, look at our future, and say if we want to have healthy communities, if we want to have a good quality of life, and if we want to be able to pay for that, this is an efficiency argument as well, then we've got to be much more serious about state planning. A lot of times we come to state planning from different perspectives. It's an environmental perspective, or it's a social equity perspective, or an economic perspective. But at the end of the day, it's about creating quality of life in New Jersey, and all of those perspectives care about that. It's also about creating that efficiently. And when we talk about planning, we can keep doing exactly what we've been doing. I mean, we have very good data that shows that we keep sprawling. And we have very good data that shows that sprawl is costing us a lot of money, the taxpayers. We don't see it, every month, but we know it's costing us more money, and we know 20 years, 30 years, it's going to cost us even more money to help maintain all of this infrastructure that we've built. So, as just smart taxpayers, we should be concerned about how we grow, how we expand our infrastructure, and how we redirect growth back to those places that we need it. From the state plan standpoint, we have a lot of optimism for this current state strategic plan, and a lot of it comes from what Eileen had said, and what others are saying is, what makes a state plan work is not that it's a well-written document, although that's certainly nice. It comes from how do you implement it. We have a state planning act that has no teeth, so it means that the only way the plan gets implemented is through administrative will, and the will of the people, us, to make it happen. This is an administration that for at least the last year and a half has said, we care about this and we're going to take steps moving in this direction. We'll see on April 25th what the final plan looks like. But once that plan comes out, we still have our work cut out for us to implement that. There's still a state planning commission that has a large number of vacancies. Those need to be filled. There's going to be criteria for the plan that needs to come together so we know where exactly we are going to have growth and where we don't want growth to happen. So those are still some things that have to happen. And even more important is we have to look at what are the administration's actions after this plan is adopted. Are we supporting programs that are going to allow more development to happen in cities and in areas that are already built up? Are we going to be creating incentives for continuing sprawl? So we have to be very conscious of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Finally, Bob Anticello is Executive Director of the Jersey City Redevelopment Agency. He's a planner, and he's been active in redeveloping a lot of state's second largest cities' brownfields. Bob?
Thank you. I guess you guys can hear. I come at this from a very provincial point of view, which is, Jersey City, which we tend to be provincial to begin with, and then at the end of the day, it's how does it affect cities? Because if we're going to grow cities, there's a lot to do with it. Obviously, it's not like a 1 or 2 family home. Clearly, Jersey City, right now we have 1,000 units under construction. In downtown, we'll have 3,000 by the end of the year. There's no other city in the state that has that kind of boom. And we're lucky, as I say all the time, because we're right outside of New York. But cities survive and cities thrive because of the opportunities they provide their residents. And we provide a lot of opportunities for a lot of other people's residents, but we don't necessarily provide them for our residents. This last census count at Jersey City had 250,000 people. By HUD's own admission, they visit about 25,000 residents. We think we are the virtual largest city in the state. And as a result of that, we look at this plan and we say, what's in it for us? It has to be a realignment of state resources and say, look, we want you to develop Journal Square. And the reason why we want you to develop Journal Square is that 8.3 million people use the path transportation every year, and another 8 million use buses and jitneys. So 60 million people come to Journal Square every year to use the transportation network. And therefore, we want to help you rebuild Journal Square. We didn't get a transit grant this last round. There's not another round. It gets very challenging to build in Journal Square because we compete with ourselves. It's not like you can build in Journal Square cheaper than you can build on our waterfront. It's not like our tax abatements on our waterfront are any different than our tax abatements in Journal Square. So even on a small level, 16 and a half square miles, which is Jersey City, we're completely out of alignment. And that's because all land use decisions are political decisions and ultimately become part of the problem. So, that's my take when we look at the state plan, which is, look, if the rising tide floats all ships, Jersey City's fine. We're going to do fine whether or not the state plan is enacted or not because of our proximity to New York. But if it doesn't help Newark, if it doesn't help Patterson, if it doesn't help Passaic, if it doesn't help Hampton, if it doesn't help our sisters in sister city in Elizabeth, then where do we go with it? If it doesn't help Plainfield, and if that's where we want it to grow, then someone has to show some leadership down here and realign resources to help those areas.
Thank you. All the panelists talked about smart growth, but stepping back and looking at the big picture, is smart growth alive and well, or is it on life support here in New Jersey?
Just anybody jump in?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's on life support. I think it's actually alive and well. And I think in the last couple of years, we've seen some things that make it even more alive and well, which is we have some major demographic shifts that are taking place nationally, and New Jersey is in line with those. We have the baby boomer generation as well as the millennial generations that represent the two largest cohorts of people in New Jersey and the nation. Both of those groups have housing preferences that favor smart growth. They're looking to, in the case of empty nesters, they're looking to downsize, they're looking to be in places that are more walkable. The millennial generation, they're looking for places where they can take public transportation, where they can walk, where they can be around a mix of uses. So the two largest groups that are out there looking for housing now are looking for smart growth types of places, and we're not supplying them what they're looking for. So I think smart growth is alive and well from a market demand standpoint. And you also see a large number of places that are really starting to grab this. You know, you've got obviously cities like New Brunswick and Jersey City, but you've also got towns like Montclair and Frankfurt and Collingswood that are also starting to redevelop their towns to create these walkable places.
Anybody else?
I would just add that I think evolving the smart growth conversation to also include making smart investments and seeing growth in our industries that may not be in our downtowns, like agriculture, tourism, which may not be in our downtown areas. We need to think about all of our diverse industries in the state, think about diversifying our structures and prioritizing investments in the right places. So it's not a smart growth area, but a dumb growth area. It's a smart place to invest for the right things that you want. So if you want agriculture, you invest in land preservation money. If you want downtowns and transit, you use that money you have in the right places. So the plan talks about a statewide, more of it as an investment strategy, and that we need to have a level of growth, the right kind of growth, in the right places. But even our rural areas need investment and consideration because many people live there too. Many businesses use that land as one of their principles for keeping their business alive. And New Jersey is a better place when we have those hinterlands, those successful farms, successful tourism destinations, heritage tourism, places like the North. That's all part of New Jersey too, not just the downtowns. So we argue that smart growth is kind of a statewide conversation, not just the nodes of where transit intersects with people and houses.
I'd like just to weigh in and say, I definitely agree that smart growth is, everybody wants it. And I think that what Peter talked about was the fact that we see a trend back towards those cities. But Bob used the important word there. If the decisions about the investment are political, it won't work. And that's where, and if we speak in the state plan, it speaks to what Dan was talking about, the rural economies and agriculture. But we keep missing something else. We talk always about center-based development, and then we talk about stopping stall. And then, if that's what we're going to get out of this plan, I have to say that many of the citizens of the state are concerned because they see the waiver rule, they see the water quality management rules and plans not moving forward in terms of septic area planning. So there's concern there for what is happening in our rural areas. If we're going to do the right things in the growth areas, we have to have that conversation in those rural areas as well. We see the Permanent Extension Act moving forward, and we have concerns about, as one example of that, the planning area of the Highlands is treated with less protection than anywhere else in the state of New Jersey, other than the proposed Permanent Extension Act. So when you're having these conversations at the same time, you have to understand this is where the conflict is. People stop believing. If we're going to do the right things in the city, it means making it easier to happen there. It means making brownfield development easier than greenfield development. But if we don't tighten up on the rural end of it, we're not doing that. So I think this is the conflict that has been continuing.
Eileen, you mentioned the waiver rule. One of the criticisms many environmental groups have of this proposed strategic investment plan is the, I guess it was done by an executive order, the establishment of a steering committee to adjudicate disputes between agencies and conflicts between agencies. John talked about the need for administrative flexibility and discretion. How do you balance those two? I mean, there's a concern out there that under this plan, economic development will trump environmental protections. I guess I'll toss that one to Dan first, but I'd like to hear both John and discuss that too.
Well, I think Eilen's right. This is a classic conversation that isn't growing or new. It's the conflict that's there and on the street. I think it's right to say, I guess it's right to say that the steering committee that was formed by the executive order is being put in place to see the conflicts between agencies be resolved. And that was something that through the cross-acceptance process was number one, no matter what county we were in, number one as an issue. And the draft that we inherited really didn't provide a framework at all to resolve those things. So that was one of the reasons why we prioritized. We wanted to give our stakeholders and the people who participated in the cross-acceptance process an understanding that through this dialogue over the past couple of years, we heard them. And sometimes in my past life, I worked in land preservation, and that talk about a strategic investment program. The folks that do land preservation are about as strategic with their money as you can imagine. And when you go to build parks and trails, do good things for people, you couldn't imagine the kind of red tape you encounter between agencies to build those right things, to do those public projects. So red tape isn't just about a corporate campus in a cornfield that doesn't belong. Red tape's also about doing the things that we want to do that make sense, cheaper and quicker, to deliver that public benefit to the residents that expect it and are paying for it. And there's a lot of things that can get caught up in that conversation between departments that isn't really always adult conversations. It's a lot of history, a lot of statutory conflicts that are created by legislative actions at times, programmatic disputes, regulatory disputes, and we don't think it's smart government to let that go forward. And in the end, oftentimes the same decision gets made, it just costs 4 times as much, it takes 5 times as long. That's not smart government, that's not smart growth. So we think that there's a venue is appropriate for resolving these disputes, not just project by project, but actually fixing the policies and programs that create the disputes. So instead of going permit application by permit application, continually accepting this friction. I must have said something So we're basically saying in the state plan that we don't accept this anymore, and we're going to be part of the solution, and that creating clear signals and clear paths to see good things happen will help local governments and regional entities meet their goals and objectives as well.
When I was in the Department of Environmental Protection, the job I really wanted was to be Assistant Commissioner for Common Sense. And I was impressed. I was there for 12 commissioners, and almost all of them came in and said they were going to continue to protect the environment as the department was doing in the past, but they were going to apply common sense. That was a new convention. And that this administration does that, and all the previous ones did. And the problem is that I would have been a good Assistant Commissioner for Common Sense, but I don't trust anyone else to do it. And at the same time, I also felt when I was in that department that if someone was proposing a group home for people with disabilities, and someone else was proposing a new water lot, and they had exactly the same impacts on the stream or on the wetlands, I had no ability to distinguish one from the other in their decision-making under the law of rules. And I think I think smart growth would mean that a regulator should have that discretion. I don't have the answer to how you get there in a way that provides where there's any widespread public trust in that, the exercise of that discretion. It obviously needs to be open and decision-making available to public comments, period, and acknowledge what the decision is being made. But I think that's the answer.
That was great, John. Thank you. I think that, Tom talked about, the steering committee. Again, there was under Governor McGreevy the Smart Growth Committee, which was to do the exact same thing that the steering committee is to do now. But I think before we get to a steering committee, which I assume will not be meeting in public, I would ask a couple of questions. One is, we have a state planning commission. What's its job and what's its role? If it sets forth and adopts a plan that is clear, that we all understand what's going to happen where, then I get the steering committee. But if I can't tell you what's in the plan and what's going to happen where, then I don't want the steering committee. Because then I think it's back to a project-by-project, ad hoc basis, and the public aren't going to be part of the conversation. So I come back to the fact that we've got a state planning commission for a reason, and I agree with Peter that it should be, all the members should be there, because many of the members are actually cabinet members. And I get that, and I understand that, I understand why they're there. But we need full membership to get all those viewpoints at the table. So the State Planning Commission, I'm concerned about the adoption of the plan on April 25th, when I don't think that plan is clear, and then there's going to be a steering committee, and I'm not going to be privy to those decisions. I don't see those information-based maps to make decisions. If we're going to have flexibility, and I actually get that, you still have to have the information upon which to base the decision so you can write a rationale and the public are privy to it and see it. And I'll give you an example, because all too often we hear that the environmentalists don't want growth anywhere. Believe it or not, there was common sense applied to many of the decisions, and that's why there are now 9 centres recognised by the Highlands Council. The first of those was in the municipality of Byron. There was an area where Byron wanted to grow. It is currently a wooded area, and it's adjacent to wooded areas with the highest resource values. So you would think the Highlands Council is going to say absolutely no, and the environmentalists are going to say absolutely no. It was the first centre recognised by the Highlands Council, and the environmentalists supported it. They actually said, yes, that's smart growth. So to me, that's just one very small example, but it tells you it can happen. Flexibility was applied, and the plan is going to work. And the studies were done to make sure, look at the resource values, to look at infrastructure, to look at capacity. If we don't have the answers to those, we don't have smart growth, and we don't have a state plan.
Thank you, Ellen. You talked about getting the public involved. How difficult is it going to be after the scrapping of the first state plan, after all these years of the course acceptance? So how difficult is it going to be to get local officials and the public to buy into this new plan? Peter?
Well, I think generally people will participate in the process if they see there's going to be an outcome from the process. If they think that it's just going to be another document, then there's not going to be a lot of interest in participating. I think what we have now, depending on how the plan comes out on the 25th and what the next steps are, if the counties are going to play a very active role, and if that role will result in investments going into certain places or rules being changed for certain things, I think you'll see people getting engaged. People care about what happens to their property and what happens to their neighbor's property. So I think people will get engaged if there's that sense that there's going to be something that will happen as a result of this process.
I'm excited to hear Eileen's comments, and we're probably a couple days short probably should have had this maybe midweek next week, because we've been working really hard. We've reviewed all the public comments, and we've been vetting some of the revisions we're proposing that I wish I could talk to you about today. I'll be talking to you all about it shortly through the public process we have designed to get the plan out there. But trust that the things that are being said here, and the written comments we got in the testimony at the public hearings, we've been listening, and we want to have a stronger plan as a result. So you're not going to see a plan that just as adopted proposed for adoption. I think we went through a real serious process. We were seriously listening, and I look forward to being able to demonstrate that publicly when we make recommendations to the Commission for adoption.
Bob talked about urban investments. Are there enough incentives in the new plan and disincentives to steer investment to the right places? Okay? Put me on the spot. I apologize.
You know, planning needs to work with the market. If the plan doesn't have regulatory authority, the Highlands has regulatory authority, the Pinelands has regulatory authority, those municipalities need to engage. Meadowlands has unique authority. So certainly it's about investing. And I think that definitely this plan does put our chips on the table and says we believe the market is not just depressed, but it's shifting. We see signs of that all over the place in national consumer interests. So I think the classic conversation about putting up barriers to growth and putting incentives for growth in the right and wrong places, I think we really need to consider rethinking that conversation a bit and really focusing our energy more on seeing that redevelopment inflow can happen in these right places. And I think the battles of yesterday over sprawling housing in the hinterlands, I think that still will take place in certain regions of the state. There's still going to be pressure in the hinterlands, so I'm not naive enough to say that there's not going to be, which is why we argue in the plan that we should still continue our investment in our statewide investment land preservation strategies, also strengthen municipalities' ability to preserve that land working with growth through improving tools for clustering and amending the municipal land use law, working with the legislature and the governor to see that clustering strategies are more efficient and effective. So I think we can get a lot of the fighting sprawl part done with fighting with smart investments in land preservation and empowering municipalities and regional entities to have their clustering strategies be effective and working. In some places they're working well, in some places they're not working as well as they could or should if legislation were to change to enable those programs. So I personally think that the conversation's changed a lot over the past 10 years. Developers are not getting under contract raw land in the hinterlands like they were in the early 2000s. I know this because I negotiated land deals during that time. And frankly, the world's changed, and we're embracing that. We're trying to focus our resources for the next market.
Bob, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, just to point out, I think the development community has really gotten the message. For example, Toll Brothers, Urban Living, those guys are Hoboken, Jersey City, and K-High, once again, has always had a presence in Jersey City. 77 Hudson Street, you see advertised every Sunday. There's a big presence there. I mean, what we've done in Jersey City, between Brownfield, we have two large chromium redevelopment areas. We have Bayfront, which has, I don't know how many hundreds of million tons of chromium, and PPG, which is canal crossings. Both of those plans are smart plans. Both of those plans, the canal crossing plan actually already has light rail to it. We'll have a second light rail stop. It'll be the most comprehensive transit-oriented development in the city of Jersey City. Situated right in the middle of what is Jersey City's Harlem, between three historically African-American neighborhoods, with the large affordable housing obligation in place already, so that the grid that connects with the historic Jackson Hill neighborhood. So, I mean, we've done a lot in the city. We kind of view this, and Bob Cotter has been instrumental in this here, as kind of New Jersey City as a lab. When Ken Gibson was mayor of Newark, he basically said where cities are heading for Newark at first. We kind of look at that a little bit differently. We don't think we're in that same boat where cities in New Jersey, cities in New Jersey. We think there's a lot of things that we picked up